Hello and good afternoon. My name is Nico Heller. This is Reboot 2030, the Democracy School's YouTube channel. My guest today is Aida Martínez Tinaut. She's a data analyst from Spain, from Catalonia, in fact. And she's joining us today because she's working on a rather exciting project. She's involved in preparing for the launch of a universal basic income pilot scheme. That's a mouthful. And when I first heard about this, I was really rather excited. There've been a number of pilots. I believe there's been one in Finland. In fact, here in Berlin, where I'm based, they were trying to push for a pilot earlier this year, but they failed at the early hurdle. They didn't actually manage to get enough signatures to have even a referendum to decide whether to have a pilot or not. So it didn't happen. Universal basic income seems to be something that some people are really very enthusiastic about, but the vast majority of people, including most mainstream politicians, do seem to reject it. I guess part of the idea is that under universal basic income, people get something for nothing. It takes away the incentive to work, and it essentially makes people lazy and complacent. Now, a lot of people, including a lot of academics, have been doing serious research on this subject to disagree. They feel or they believe strongly, and evidence seems to be backing this up, that far from making people lazy, it actually frees people up. It opens up spaces, opportunities for a different kind of work, and it takes away this existential fear, anxiety of basically falling through the cracks. Of course, it also would do away with an awful lot of bureaucracy, because all the means testing that's going on with most social security systems eats up an awful lot of resources that could be deployed much more effectively and productively in other ways. Now, these are the kinds of arguments that people are putting forward, but somehow don't seem to be getting anywhere with it. My take on this is somewhat different. I do think that universal basic income is actually, I do believe it's the future. For me, I don't so much link it to social security or to welfare. I link it to the future of work. For me, there seems to be a fundamental contradiction. On the one hand, we are all in favor of digitalization. We also agree that digitalization is essentially about automation of work. In its final consequence, it's about automating work out of the equation. The good old production function, capital plus labor equals production, then becomes reduced to capital equals production. Now, of course, if digitalization is going to advance in any meaningful way, more and more high-skilled people are going to lose their jobs. People with analytic skills, with diagnostic skills, a lot of process. I mean, we're not too far away from a fully automated car factory, for example. So hundreds of thousands of workers that today still work in car factories may no longer be needed. Now, of course, there's a huge contradiction here. On the one hand, we want digitalization, and this is very much the gospel that politics preaches. On the other hand, we actually haven't got a solution for what we're going to do with all the labor, all the productive forces that have been freed up through it. And in my belief, in my view, the universal basic income can make a very viable contribution here. It somehow, it sort of solves that problem. It would free up industry to allow industry to digitalize radically fast and become more competitive, more efficient, far more productive that way, without actually creating a conundrum where more and more people lose their jobs and are being unemployed and essentially, have to fear about their existence. So for me, universal basic income is not so much linked to welfare, not so much linked to social security, although that comes into it. For me, it's far more linked to the future of work, to the future of production, and to the kind of the economy of the future. Of course, when people are freed up to do other things other than having to engage in labor. They might also start to think about the really big problems we face, problems to do with climate change, problems to do with the mass extinction of species, problems to do with war, problems to do with all kinds of complex issues that at the moment we simply haven't got the bandwidth to really fully engage with. So for me, this idea of universal basic income really comes as a package with a new way of organizing life, organizing work, but also with really a new definition of what work in the future might look like and what it might be. So having said all of these things, instead of trying to set the scene a little bit, I can see that Aida is actually already here in the waiting room. So let me invite her in and let me say hello to her. Now, I have already said she works in Spain. Hi, there you are. Can you see me?
Hello.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Aida, I have said a very few words about my own take on the universal basic income, and essentially the kind of line of argument that I'd like to develop, because there is a sort of a social justice argument that sort of says, well, it would essentially kind of provide people with a kind of a very secure basis from which they can operate. It would kind of do away with the humiliation that people experience at job centers and through other kind of means-tested social security schemes. Now, linked to that argument, of course, in my view, is very often the counter argument, well, people would be getting something for nothing and it would breed laziness. And there's a whole set of arguments that, in a sense, kind of justifies the means testing and the current status quo. I want to go into a different direction today, and I want to look at, sort of to think really from scratch in a way, to sort of say, well, on the one hand, we have things like digitalization, which is driving productivity, which is driving efficiency across industry, and it is one of the main gospels our politicians preach, to really drive. But of course, one very fundamental of digitalization is automation. That is very much the idea. So the very idea, the very basic production function of capital plus labor equals production kind of gets reduced to capital equals production, and labor somehow falls out of the equation. And so in a way, a universal basic income is engaging with that very contradiction, and instead of saying, well, yeah, we can wholeheartedly engage with digitalization and the automation of work, but we have to, in a way, create a new social contract that takes account of the kind of the massive labor force that is freed up. And we're not just talking manual labor or repetitive labor, the way we talked about the first and the second wave of industrialization. Here we talk about highly skilled labor. We're talking about people with diagnostic skills. We're talking people with analytic skills, traders at merchant banks, just as much as doctors who may in the future not be needed so much anymore because patients might get automated sort of diagnostics through call centers. So there is a massive problem building up. On the one hand, we have digitalization that promises massive efficiency gains through the kind of combination of AI, artificial intelligence, and information technology and so forth. On the other hand, we really don't know how to square that with a labor pool which wants to continue to work. So rather than linking the universal basic income, as it's traditionally done, to social security and welfare, at which point it kind of becomes almost like something, a privilege, something that we give to people who can basically manage their own lives, but not to those who can't. We take it away from there and sort of say, well, actually, what we are looking, in my view, looking at is a new social contract that redefines what we understand by work, because there's many kind of forms of work that at the moment are not accounted for. A new social contract that sort of says, no, you're not going to fall through the cracks if we very aggressively digitalize. And a new social contract that says we really have to think about the relationship between work and play, between family and work, between employer and employee, and between state and citizen. And in a way, to think about the universal basic income within that context, to me, takes away this whole thing about getting something for nothing. So this is roughly basically what I would like to see, whether we can, in a way, gain some insight from what you're planning to do in Spain, whether we can gain some insight from that, how that can actually drive or help to drive a sort of an economic agenda that helps us also to redefine what we understand by work, and that helps us to redefine the relationship between citizen and state. So let's start at the beginning. You're quite a broadly educated person, and in fact, you've got quite a technical background. I know from your CV that you have a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics. That's a very solid kind of grounding. But then you went on into something much more technical than that. You're very much into sort of the field of analytics. Can you tell me very briefly what, a little bit about where you came from and how did your educational journey kind of developed?
Yes, so I was always interested in social issues. So I found that these degrees, philosophy, politics, and economics, was really interesting for me to understand broadly what some problems were in the world. But also I happened to find that maybe I was lacking some of the practical ways of objectively knowing the effects of some things or the inexistence of effect of some other things. And that's why I was interested in data analysis and this more technical approach to social sciences, to implement this causal inference in different aspects that I find interesting.
So that obviously, because it's interesting, you then ended up working for the Office of the Pilot Plan for the Implementation of the Universal Basic Income. I believe you're based in Barcelona, is that correct?
Yes, the office to implement the pilot plan it's in the Catalan government. We are physically in Barcelona, but we work for the Catalan government.
Yeah, absolutely. And your role is to you're presumably you're working within a team and people have different functions. Yeah. How was this? Because I remember you were kind of on a panel in Berlin, not in Berlin, but a Berlin panel where you were talking about the Berlin kind of attempt to have a pilot, and of course that didn't go anywhere. But I thought that was very interesting. And you could you just explain in what way your pilot kind of has started from a different starting point than the Berlin attempt?
Yeah, so yes, just to summarize, our office is not very big. We are just 7 people, and each of us is specialized in different areas. So there's an economist, there's a lawyer, then there's me, a data analyst, there's a sociologist, and so on. And we were invited in Berlin because they were trying to get enough signatures in order to implement a pilot plan there in Berlin, similar to what we are designing to implement in Catalonia. The main difference between their design and our design is that ours is fully funded by the government, and theirs was not. Theirs was a civil society movement, and it was there were people very encouraged by the pilot plan and the UBI, of course, but obviously there's more difficulties when you are not backed and funded by the government, because, for example, the office in Catalonia, we are finding not few difficulties, but still, since we are like the institution, we are able to negotiate, to talk with different agents and to talk with different public administrations, something that they were not able to do. And well, we were invited there because they wanted us to explain what we were going to do in Catalonia in order to maybe convince some people to sign for the referendum.
Now, my understanding is that, generally speaking, there's sort of 2 ways of, first of all, you obviously have to decide on, what catchment area you include. Is it a city, or is it like a country? And once you've made that decision, you then have to decide is it smaller than a city? Is it just a small community? And so you have to make those, how you calibrate your sample. And you also, of course, have to decide, is it going to be a random sample? Are you going to take people out of a hat? Or do you sort of say, well, we're going to take everybody in a particular area? How did you go about deciding how to calibrate your sample? Who's going to be involved? Because, of course, from a kind of a citizen point of view, I'd love to be like, in your sample. Sure. Who wouldn't? So how did you go about deciding who was going to be in and who was not?
Yeah. So There's different items that I want to explain a little bit in order for everyone to be able to understand the design, because it's a little bit unusual comparing it to other pilot plans, but we believe it's a really good design in order to understand what happens when the UBI is implemented. So first of all, we were very interested in understanding what happens with the universality part of the universal basic income, right? Because in many pilot plans, there has been an interest in testing what happens to the individuals when the UBI is implemented. But a really important part of this policy is that it should be universal, as it theoretically. So we wanted to know what should happen. Obviously, it's impossible to test universality because you couldn't be able to implement a pilot plan. You should be implementing the public policy directly. So the only way to know what would happen with universality is to implement the pilot plan, not to random individuals, but to a community. So we wanted to understand more about universality in that part. Also, we wanted to know and understand more thoroughly what happens in a household. Because as you said before, I find it very interesting. There's different types of work or jobs, let's say. There's the jobs that are being paid, that you can be paid for, and some other jobs that sadly you're not paid for. And this usually happens intra-household. So we wanted to understand what happens with gender relationships and maybe redistribution of power in the household and stuff like that. So those are two main things that we wanted to test. So in order to do so, we managed to find a design that we were very happy with. So we will be giving the UBI to 5,000 people around Catalonia. It may not sound like a lot to some people, but it's actually a really big pilot plan. It's one of the largest pilot plans in the world. So these 5,000 people, we will divide them in two. So from the main sample being 5,000 people, we will get two samples. So 2,500 people with one design or one experiment, as you want to say it, and 2,500 people on the other part of the design. So the first design will be focused on understanding what happens with universality, right? So we have chosen 2 municipalities that in total, they have a population of around 1,200 inhabitants each. We are aware that they are not very big in order to be able to say what would happen with UBI in Barcelona, for example, but we have the constraints that a pilot plan has for its, because it's a pilot plan, right? And also these are small municipalities, but they represent 40% of the population of Catalonia and 90% of municipalities in Catalonia.
So let's just, okay, let's point. So you picked 2 municipalities, and each has 1,250 roughly. So together they're the 2.5.
No, these 2 municipalities have a 1,200 population more or less each. So
yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. So that's exactly. So and you basically pick municipalities that are in a way represent in their makeup representative of Catalonia. So in terms of men to women, old people to young people, what kind of demographic factors did you look for to sort of say this is reflective of Catalonia?
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that, because we're also very interested in what happens with public services, right? When an entire community receives the UBI, we believe that it should have a really strong effect on public services, especially on health services and social services. So we found 2 municipalities with variables that represent more or less what happens in Catalonia, with social services users, number of social services users, number of hospitalizations. Also, we want to we checked for the graduation tax for high school, and also we checked for the mean incomes, yeah, unemployment, like the typical demographic.
One question here. There's sort of two kinds of statistics that I would be quite curious to see how they develop. One is sort of related to hate. So related to racism, related to homophobia, related to hate crime, to xenophobia. Are you tracking that? That's the one question related to hate crime. And the other one related to domestic violence. What happens in terms of violence in the household? But I'm naming those two because intuitively I always think that when people are under severe stress, that they then perceive, like enemies where there may not be any, or they might kind of overreact or might react in a more aggressive manner towards their partner or whatever. So I wonder whether these statistics you kind of been looking at as well.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, we are going to look for these and so many other outcomes, but we still have the other part of the experiment that I didn't have time to explain. So apart from these two municipalities, which is in total 2,500 people receiving the UBI, we will have another 2,500 people chosen randomly around the entire territory of Catalonia. And this, there's an innovative way of doing that because, as you may know, most of the pilot plans that have been conducted around the world have been RCTs, so randomized control trials, where you select randomly individuals around a territory. But we wanted to know what happens in intra-household, as you were just suggesting. So we are going to randomize the sample by the household, not by the individual. So we will select around 1,000 households, and the people registered in there, they will all receive the UBI.
Irrespective of the age. So if they're like children, they will get a smaller UBI, or how is it?
Yeah. So the amount of the UBI, it's a really interesting part of the design that we made, that we were discussing it for a long time. But we ended up thinking that since the universal basic income should be basic in the sense of, we believe, fulfilling the basic material needs in order to survive. So we said, okay, it makes sense that our amount of money for the pilot plan should be close to the poverty threshold. So during the pilot plan, virtually, there shouldn't be anyone that is actually poor, if it makes sense. So in Spain, it's around 800 euros a month for an adult. So the amount of money that will be given for the pilot plan will be 800 euros a month for each adult, and 300 euros a month for underage people. Okay. But it doesn't, we don't care if it's a newborn baby or if it's 17 years old.
So you've basically got three samples, if I understand. You've got two samples of 1,200 roughly members each. That's roughly your 2,500, and you've got another sample, you said 1,000 households, which is again amounts to about 2,500 people. So that's your 5,000 sample. Do you have any? Because of course the two communities you're picking with the 1,200, 1,200 inhabitants. Do you use like control samples for that as well? That you would have an extra two communities in mind?
Yeah. So on the part of the randomized sample, we obviously have a control group, which would be actually 1,000 households, and more or less the same in everything, but they will not receive the UBI. So the differences that we may observe will be because they receive the UBI. But on the other part, on the part with two municipalities, there's also an innovative way of controlling the counterfactual there, because we found that there was really low statistical power if we wanted to just get 2 or 3 more municipalities in order to control it. So what we found is that it was suitable to do an innovative method called synthetic controlled experiment. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
But okay, so we are implementing it. We're actually.
But maybe just explain it very briefly for the
yeah,
viewers. Yes.
Yeah, sure. We are working with a researcher from the MIT, and we will basically the synthetic control experiment means that we cannot have a real counterfactual. So what we do is build a synthetic counterfactual. How is it built? We choose different variables and indicators from units that are not treated, so municipalities that are not receiving the UBI, and then with different weights and different importances, depending on the importance of the indicator and the trends. Sorry, depending on the trends that have suffered these indicators from 2012, more or less, you build a synthetic municipality, which obviously doesn't exist, but it's built from parts of real municipalities. So we will be able to control what would have happened in these 2 municipalities that received the UBI if they didn't receive it.
Okay, so this looks like a really quite a comprehensive way of sort of, if you like, looking at, you know, the statistical information that is available to you already through public sources and also through government sources, and in a way correlating that with what will happen if people receive UBI. So you're sort of saying, well, we kind of know what the general statistics are, both for the population as a whole, but also for certain subsets of the population. And now that they are receiving all that, in our sample that they're receiving the UBI, Universal Basic Income, we can see how they behave differently, whether it benefits them in some ways, whether it's actually worth the investment. Is that roughly what you're looking for?
Yeah, we are very interested in different effects. We believe most of them will be positive, but we are open to them not being positive because we are looking into the pilot plan with a scientific approach and an objective approach, obviously. And we want to know more things about individual effects, community effects, and intra-household effects. So individual effects go from poverty, inequality, what do people do with the money, not because we are controlling it, because I don't know if I said that, but from the office, we will not be controlling any of the expense, so they will be able to do whatever they want to do with it. But we are obviously interested in what they actually do with it. Maybe they start a master's degree, or maybe they reduce their hours of working because they now can spend more time with the family, or otherwise maybe they hire a nanny and they want to spend more time at work. Also, aggregate and community effects. We want to know if people start participating in the community more, or maybe what happens with, as I said, with public services. Do people go more to the hospital because they now have the time to do so, or they go less because they're not so anxious as they were before for money reason? We also want to know more about attitudes, values, and relationships between members of the household. Also, what do people do when they get the money? Maybe they are living with someone, not because they want to, but because they have to, because they don't have enough money to go away. I'm talking about young people, or maybe women that are being abused, stuff like that. And to do so, we are going to conduct several surveys during the pilot plan. We're conducting one survey before everyone receives the first payment in order to know where we come from. And second survey once there's been 1 year, one entire year of payments, because these payments will be for 2 years, so 24 months of 800 euros a month. And there will be a third and a third survey conducted at the end of the experiment, and then a last one 6 or 7 months after it has finished, in order to know if some of the effects last or they do not last once the money is kept away.
I mean, you could, being sort of the devil's advocate, you could argue that, of course, more money is going to make you happier, especially if you're on a low income. So there is always going to be that. But of course, cynics would say, well, that's why you should go and work harder and earn more. You know, that's very much the incentive that often is sort of like mentioned for people to work harder or to work at all. Now, are you looking at the cost side as well, the cost to the government in terms of what the savings, if you like, not on the side of households, but on the side of government and service providers? You know, how that might affect services and that side of it. Are you looking at that too?
Yeah, just a little bit of explaining what you said at the beginning. I think it's interesting when people think that I mean, with a pilot plan, obviously poor people would be better off than middle-class people, because they will be having a larger effect, right? But it's interesting that some people think that with a UBI, poor people will not work, or will not have enough incentives to work. But with the social benefit system that we have nowadays, the poor people receiving social benefits, they actually can't work. So we are okay with that nowadays, but we are not okay they choosing not to work in a
That's right. That's right. But there is this kind of, isn't there? There is this kind of idea that the social services, the advisors in the job centers are essentially trying to incentivize people to find work by putting them onto training schemes, by all kinds, and also by obviously offering them jobs. And if they don't take them, then they receive less money. So there's a way of, you know, there's both penalties and there's rewards. So, and this kind of system of managing the unemployed somehow seems to kind of, you know, seems to be what most people would want to see. Now, my question is like, I think I'm a total supporter of universal basic income, although I have seen a number of these now taking place, of the pilots, and I haven't really seen much of a shift in political awareness. For example, in Germany, you would expect that the Social Democrats, at least, would be in favor of it, but they aren't, because the unions are really not in favor of it. And so there's even on the left, there's a lot of, you know, sort of resistance to it. And of course, on the right, there's resistance anyway. So it's very hard to see how this, now, when you put this forward, you know, when I believe this was actually initiated by your president, wasn't it? It was like it came right from the top, didn't it? The idea to have.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, there's not a clear ideology for the UBI, so there are even some proposals for the UBI that come from a more neoliberal approach. That, for example, the office that I work for, we are for a progressive way of thinking, the UBI, not a neoliberal one. Yeah, the idea of the pilot plan came from the very top of the government. It was an agreement that came from a small party with the government party, in order to let them present the president, right? So I would say that a really strong argument for the UBI, or at least for the pilot plan that we are using, because there's actual economic simulations that back this argument, is that it would be actually more efficient for the state or the government, because nowadays with the social benefit system, since there's so many criteria to meet, and the process to be able to get a social benefit is so long, and there's so many things you need to be checking, not only when people are asking for a benefit, but also when they have been granted one. There's so many workers that are only be able to manage this kind of documents, and it's pure bureaucracy. They are not able, like, for example, we talk with several social workers, and they always tell us, we are not able to do our work, our job, because we are focused on conducting and dealing with emergencies, people not being able to eat for a month, people not being able to pay for electricity and stuff like that. So, for example, the UBI would prevent social workers to do everything that they're doing now, because there's no criteria. You don't have to apply for the UBI, but because it's given to every citizen, because it's not something you have to work for. It's a right you get because you are a human being in a territory with the UBI as a public policy. And these social workers will be able to do many different things that are not able to do now, like orientation, family work, so many different things that they are not doing, not because they don't want to, but because they don't have time to do so. Also with health services, the statistics about, now I don't quite remember the exact number, and I don't want to risk myself in saying something that is not actually true, but the statistics about anxiety in Spain, it's so I mean, it's a really profound and deep problem here, that obviously we don't know how many anxiety problems are related only to money problems or not to money problems. But with the COVID-19 crisis, there was an increase of anxiety problems, obviously related to people not being able to work, so not being able to get any kind of income. And we believe that people should be able to be maybe not relaxed, but they should be able to go to sleep relaxed, knowing that at least they know they are able to feel the fridge, or they are able to pay for electricity, especially in a context that we are living with the Ukraine war, the economic crisis that we're living, and everything that is going on. So in summary, I would say that even though it seems that it's a really large expense from the state, it's actually not, because the amount of expense that we are focusing right now with social benefits that are not actually getting people that are needing them. So the problem of non-take-up, it's a problem that it's not only happening in Spain, but also in every other country in Europe. People meeting the criteria and not asking for the social benefits.
Now, by calling it a pilot, and I believe most schemes of that kind have called it a pilot, so I guess it's just what people call it. But in all other contexts, a pilot suggests that there is an intention to do the real thing if certain criteria or conditions are met. So if I build like an aeroplane, apply a pilot thing and it flies, then I will build the real thing. And there's criteria that I would apply, rigorous criteria that say, well, if we can achieve X, Y, and Z, if this assumption holds, if this assumption holds, then the pilot succeeded, and then we're going to go ahead with the real thing. Otherwise, in my view, it wouldn't really be a pilot, but it would be what I would call an experiment. And there's no strings attached to the experiment, and there's no follow through on the experiment. But with a pilot, the assumption always seems to be that this is kind of the spearhead of what is to follow. This is that there is a sort of, now how is this in Catalonia? Is this a pilot in that sense that that somebody sort of said to you, well, if you can prove to us that this makes sense, we'll do it? Or is this sort of say, well, let's see what happens? I mean, what is the actual sort of state of play? To what extent is it an experiment, and to what extent is it a pilot?
So it's very interesting what you're saying. there wasn't any challenge, as you said, like, okay, if you can prove that UBI works, we will implement it. Because as you may know, in Catalonia, there's a fragmented political context. So there are a lot of parties right now, and in order to implement a UBI, there should be a strong majority for it. What we were asked for is to test the effects of the UBI on the individual level and on a community level, in order to give to the political debate objective and scientific arguments. Because right now, obviously the UBI, the case for UBI is a really ideological one, right? Especially when we are talking about a very specific approach, which is a progressive UBI approach. It's ideological, but we were asked to test if are true or are not true. So, for example, you know that almost everyone, when you talk about UBI, almost everyone would say, so people would get lazy and people would stop working. That's very dangerous for our country and stuff like that, right? So what we will be, one of the things that we will be able to do with our pilot plan is to say, okay, that's actually true or that's actually not true. Because what we find that sometimes lacks in the political debate around UBI, it's actual facts. And if actual facts are in the parliament and then still some parties are still against it, it's okay. We are living in a democracy, but then the arguments should be stronger because they will not be supported by objective facts.
So, I mean, you must know the situation. You've got a bicycle to sell and people come along, they look at the bike. Some people are really bargaining. You get a sense that they actually would buy it at the right price. And other people, they're ready to settle on another bike. And they're just basically, they're just there because, well, you're on route to the next kind of thing. So, and with UBI, I very often have this sort of sense that whilst these pilots do happen, almost like a box ticking exercise, the question is, how serious are these people in terms of actually buying your results or scrutinizing them? I mean, I have been involved in sort of social research myself in the past, and I've experienced it very often that you have to do the research because, in fact, in many areas it's there's legislation that mandates planning or whatever that you do the research, but ultimately people already made their mind up. And do you have a sense that there's an actual bargain to be struck, or do you have the sense that you're at the very beginning of this process? Because I mean, we just had a social security reform in Germany. You have this thing called Hartz IV, which is a means-tested system that's built on rewards and penalties. And this was brought in under Schröder, a social democrat, back in 12 years ago, I think in 2008 or 9, I mean, I'm not sure when, a long time ago. And it basically survived. And the Social Democrats basically decided when they kind of got reelected last autumn that they're finally going to get rid of Hartz IV, that they're going to do away with the penalties, the sanctions, as they call them here, that you've been sanctioned. And of course, now it's kind of basically, and they call it now Bürgergeld, which means as much as citizens' money. They've moved to a much nicer term. It's no longer called unemployment benefit or social security. It's called citizens' money. It almost sounds like universal basic income, but it's not, because all the penalties are still there. All the sanctions are still there. All they have done is they've adjusted it for inflation, and they've added a few bells and whistles, and have given job centers much more leeway in terms of helping people into jobs. So they now can sort of say, well, there's a job at the call center, you should really take this, and if you don't, we're going to cut your benefits. Now this is after the Social Democrats had promised that they're going to do away with the sanctions regime. and they kind of basically caved in, and there wasn't much political resistance to keeping the old system. And there isn't so much of a big outcry in the general populace either. So, you know, this is a million miles away from a universal basic income. Even the idea of doing away with sanctions would not have been a universal basic income at that stage, but it would have been sort of halfway house. But now they're fully pulled back to the old sanctions regime. And you kind of wonder what kind of learning has happened in the last 10, 12 years. As you said, on behalf of the cost, the social cost of these regimes, you know, the kind of the inefficiency of these regimes. You know, the way you sort of said that social workers spend their time on helping people to fill in forms and firefighting rather than doing like much more important work that they simply haven't got the time for. So there seems to be the clock seems to be turning back in Germany, and I wonder whether a similar trend might be sort of noticeable across Europe. I know that in the UK, for example, where I've lived many years, that, you know, the social security system has been sort of like, you know, rolled back more and more and more and more, and become harder and harder and harder. You know, so I wonder, I mean, somehow what you're doing in Catalonia, it kind of goes against the trend. And I'm just really quite curious to see how much political will there is to kind of follow through with this, or whether you kind of are building a white elephant.
Yeah, so obviously there's different opinions from different parties, and also within parties there's people for UBI or people, I wouldn't say against UBI, but not so convinced by UBI. But the thing is that, as I said, the office was created in order to conduct this pilot plan, not anything else. But one thing that I could say is that I believe there's a broad majority agreeing that the actual social benefit system is maybe I wouldn't say it's not working, but it has flaws and they have to be solved. So some people think that the actual social system should be improved, and some people believe that it should be changed into a UBI approach. So what we believe will happen with the pilot plan is that maybe, I mean, there could be two different results, right? And I believe one is better than the other one, but I don't believe any of it is a bad result. So the result that I believe would be better is that the social majority in Catalonia were convinced that this is the way to go. It's, as you said, we live in a digitalized labor force, and more every day, there will not be enough jobs for everyone. That's an actual fact. So we should go for the UBI, and with a social majority knowing this, maybe it translates in a political majority going for it. But even though it might not be the case, another result that would be not as positive, but I would be thinking that it would be still be positive, is that it should be helping to improve the actual social system, because maybe it helps to some social benefits that actually exist right now. Maybe it would help in order to cut off some of the criteria, or maybe let people work while they are still receiving the social benefit, because otherwise that's another way of saying, okay, you are poor and we want you to still be poor, because otherwise you will not receive the money. So yeah, I would say that we have two different results ahead. I would prefer the first one, of course, and the office would prefer the first one, but if not, we believe that the effects and the impact of the pilot plan will not be zero. They will be helping some to improve some of the social benefits that we have right now.
Now, clearly you have a political audience for your pilot research in Catalonia. Do you have audiences outside of Catalonia? In other words, the government in Madrid? Are they looking at this with some interest, or what's the kind of, how is that seen? And also, like, as far as the European Commission is concerned, and Europe as a whole, because I think there's a sort of a European kind of learning opportunity there as well, and not just at the European level, but also at a kind of a sort of a bilateral level, like places like Germany or France or indeed Scandinavian countries who might be thinking about it. Do you have some kind of network, and do you kind of how do you promote the outcomes?
Yeah, so right now, all of the members of the office, but especially the head of the office, Sergi Rabantos, he's traveling a lot to different countries in order to communicate what we try to do, communicate about the idea of the UBI and why pilot plans are important in order to understand what happens with these kind of policies, and also universal policies that are a kind of policies that we don't know much about. And about Madrid, obviously they are interested, but just, I mean, a lot of people is interested in the pilot plan in Catalonia, but I wouldn't say that Madrid institutionally is interested in Catalonia. Maybe they end up conducting a pilot plan in the future. I don't know. They are implementing different pilot plans of other things. But for example, the party that is in the government in Catalonia, it also has representation in the Congress in Madrid, which is Esquerra Republicana, and they obviously are very interested in what we're doing, and I'm sure they will speak out for us. And also on the European Parliament, Esquerra Republicana also has representatives, and they will be speaking out and promoting what we're doing, and also the head of the office will be traveling to the European Parliament in order to explain what we're trying to do. And maybe
just purely at a technical level, would it be constitutionally possible for Catalonia to have a universal basic income and the rest of Spain not to have it? Because I believe in Germany, for example, this is done at a federal level. So Berlin just couldn't. I mean, this is the other thing. Berlin couldn't just have a universal basic income. It would have to be a federal decision, and then all states in Germany, federal states, would have to have it. How is it in Spain? Could you just have a regional universal basic income?
I'm not honestly so sure about the constitutional part. I believe we would be able to have it, but the difficult part for Catalonia to have a UBI is not the constitutional one, it's the funding one. Because the thing is that at least for the model that we want the UBI to be in Catalonia, hypothetically speaking, we would have to make a progressive tax reform. So in order to do this progressive tax reform, we would need the state acceptance and negotiation. So that would be the difficult part. It's not impossible, but
this is a really interesting point you're mentioning there, and this is, I mean, this would probably be another discussion, but I think it's really good that you mention it. This is the sort of the income side, if you like, the tax, because I mean, this is, in my view, you can't really talk about a fundamental sort of reform of the social security, the welfare side of it, without talking about tax reform. The two really are so closely linked. And of course, on the taxation side, at the moment, what we find is that the things that are really taxed primarily are income, in other words, labor, and consumption, like through value-added tax and so forth, like sales tax. They are the main source of income, of tax. Corporation tax is dismal, and capital gains and capital taxes are also fairly low. And now, of course, there has been a whole debate around the Tobin tax, for example, transaction taxes. There's talk about a CO2, a so-called carbon tax, where you would be taxing, like CO2, like pollution, if you like. There's, talk around a digital tax where you would be taxing processing power, like bits and bytes, megabytes and so on and so forth. So there's a whole cluster of taxes that are currently don't exist, which relate to capital and to production, as opposed to labor and consumption. And this is a really interesting kind of situation here that we have to, in a way, when we think about universal basic income, I think we also have to think about the whole restructuring of our economic settlement, and we have to really think about tax reform, and we have to think about things like the Tobin tax or the transactions tax, digital tax, carbon tax, and so on and so forth. Is there kind of a debate in Spain that kind of around these issues in relation to the universal basic income, or are they sort of seen as very separate debates?
Honestly, I would say they are very separate debates right now, but there's also some people from the academia that they are simulating how real funding for the UBI in Catalonia would look like. And they are trying, with these simulations, they're trying with this kind of taxes that you just listed. But also I want to point out that a progressive tax reform focusing on labor tax, it's still really important in my opinion. Because
yes.
I don't know in Germany, but in Spain, it's not proportional at all. Like if you are on the top 5% of income earners, the proportion of the tax amount you pay, it's so small compared to if you are on the 20 bottom percent. So even though you can get obviously money from other taxes that we are not usually talking about, at least not so generally, such as what you just said, I still believe that a tax reform focusing on actually progressing it's really important. Not only for UBI, for
it's really important, except I think it's going to be very hard to win an election on the basis of raising taxes. That's whereas with things like the Tobin tax or a digital tax, these are actually taxes that wouldn't affect the voter directly. So in terms of the constraints of a democracy, in terms of, it's like people sort of say Turkey is voting for Christmas. If people kind of vote to, and of course the people that mainly go and vote in most countries tend to be the middle class. And they obviously they would be hit hardest by the kind of progressive tax reform that you
Well, but actually, just to point out, the simulation that I'm talking about, it's conducted by two professors from University of Barcelona. One of them, he's specialized in taxes, and the other one is specialized in econometrics, and they have been simulating this funding with real data. And the thing is that the most impacted people would be the top 5-10% people, not middle class people. So yes, I agree that some kind of taxes are more friendly in a political debate, but a progressive tax reform would not necessarily be touching the amount of taxes that middle class or actually the majority of people are paying.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's not, for me, I'm just being a kind of a pragmatist in that sense, that I'm thinking, what would be the kind of the easiest way of funding it? And I totally agree that a sort of a progressive tax reform is absolutely, and it's also like the tax reform, generally, too many loopholes, too many, exceptions for this and for that. And I mean, in Germany, it's like if you're a small self-employed person, it's not impossible to do your tax returns without an accountant these days. It's so difficult, and because of course every government is using tax as a way of carrying favor with this constituency or that, and it has built layers and layers and layers of complexity into the tax system, creating a massive industry on the back of it. And of course ordinary people can't avoid taxes, but people with higher incomes, they very quickly find ways of reducing their tax burden through all kinds of tax avoiding maneuvers and strategies. So yes, absolutely, it's really important. So a last question, and this has been really, really interesting. So a last question, you're starting the whole thing starts in January and you're going to run for 2 years, from January 23 to December 25. Is that right?
It will last for 2 years, but it will not start on January 2023.
Okay.
Because there was a change in the government, and we are, well, not us, but the government is negotiating the budgets and stuff. So until the budget is not fully confirmed, we will not be able to start implementing the pilot plan. But we are implementing it. But it's just that it will not be in January. It will be on the first semester of 2023 for sure.
It'll be in the first, say again, in the first half, you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it'll then run for 2 years. That's
Yeah,
still that's still very much the
months,
plan.
yeah.
Do you have sort of like quarterly or biannual sort of markers where you sort of say, well, like, will you release data, or will you kind of produce interim reports so that people can follow the development of the pilot?
Yeah, as I said, we are conducting, apart from some qualitative activities in order to like focus groups and deep discussion with several agents. We will be conducting 4 surveys. One of them will be conducted after 12 months of the pilot plan being implemented, but we are not sure if it should be okay to start releasing data during the pilot plan, because maybe it changes behavior from the participants. So I believe that we will be waiting until the pilot plan has finished in order to conduct a really strong evaluation after that.
So so how do you, but I mean, releasing information is one thing, but collecting data is another.
Yeah.
Presumably you will, participants in the pilot, they will have to fill in, questionnaires, or they will have to answer at regular intervals?
Yeah. The surveys will be conducted to randomly selected participants in the pilot plan from the treatment group and from the control group. And yeah, we will find data from that. Also, because we don't want to risk having a low response rate on the surveys, and we don't want to risk maybe not finding anything about some kind of subgroups that we are interested in, such as, I don't know, young people. Maybe we don't have enough young people in order to say that we had causal inference there. We are going to work with registers that are publicly published. Some of them are not actually public, but they come from public administrations, and we will ask the participants to sign a commitment in order to us being able to enter their data, like health data or social services, stuff like that. So even though we don't have a high response rate that we believe we will, because we're going to give incentives and stuff like that, we will still have the registers in order to evaluate the program.
The people that will be taking part in your study, in the pilot scheme, do they know that already? Have they been informed that they will be getting that money?
No, we haven't had the opportunity yet to randomize the sample. Or, I mean, when we do it, we will communicate it with a letter. So anyone that receives a letter at their house, they will be invited to participate in this pilot plan. That doesn't mean that they will actually participate, because there's a criteria, just one. Two criteria that they will have to meet in order to be able to be participants. One of them is they have to be living in Catalonia, because since it's a Catalan government policy or pilot plan, they need to be living in Catalonia for a legal reason.
Do they have to be do they have Spanish nationality?
No. Okay. And they don't even have to have a legal status here. If they are registered in any household in Catalonia, they have the same opportunities as anyone to be participants of the pilot plan. And the other criteria is that we are excluding the 10% richest people in Catalonia. And that's not an ideological criteria. it's a practical one because in a future UBI in Catalonia, as I said, there's simulations going on. The 10%, at least the 10% richest in Catalonia wouldn't have a net UBI at the end of the year because they would be paying more taxes than the amount of UBI. So it didn't make sense that for the pilot plan they were receiving it. So if you receive a letter and you are on the 10%, on the top 10% of incomes in Catalonia, we will check it and you will not be able to be a participant even though you received the letter. Or if you manifest that you are not living in Catalonia, you will not be eligible to participate. But otherwise, if you receive a letter, you will be eligible to participate.
I don't actually know this for Germany, but because I've spent most of my life in the UK, but I know it for the UK that especially poorer people don't necessarily have bank accounts. How do you get the money to them?
Yeah, we're going to try to, I mean, we need a bank account because it's a practical reason. We are not able to conduct the pilot plan otherwise. So what we will try to do in order to prevent people not applying for the UBI just because they don't have a bank account is try to offer our help and our services to be able to help them get about a bank account. I mean,
so absolutely. So you have that. You have built that into your plan that if people don't have bank, because that would be.
Also, we are very interested in not leaving behind homeless people because, as I said, the randomization will be conducted within the households. So what happens, right, with people that are homeless, they automatically will not be able to participate in the pilot plan. Well, we were not agree with this, and we wanted them to have the same opportunities. So on the part of the two municipalities, which is the only part of the pilot plan that we have an opportunity, a real opportunity to help with this, with people in this situation, we will talk with the city councils and try to track homeless people that are maybe living there, but they're not registered there in order to then be able to receive the UBI.
That's brilliant. I think that's a really, really, really nice idea. Excellent. So this is hopefully you're going to start, in the first couple of months next year. You're going to run it for 2 years. 5,000 people get selected. 2,500 randomly at a kind of a Catalan-wide level. 2,500 basically split into two distinct municipalities. And you're going to have a control sample to basically make sure to be able to kind of to analyze your data rigorously. And from what you're saying, you're not going to release any interim data. You're going to probably going to release data at the end. Is there any way in which you can communicate with the outside world about your findings in a general kind of way, in a kind of anonymized kind of way? Or is this going to be a black box for the next 2 years, and then it's going to be opened, and then we all see what the result? How are you going to do that? Surely there must be enormous interest there, and so to see how this goes.
Yeah, we're still deciding it because, as I told you, the implementation is going to last to be a little bit later than we thought. So we are still thinking about what we will do with the data, if we are going to release some of it after 12 months being implemented, or if we will wait until the end of it. But maybe some of the preliminary data, at least more generally speaking, maybe will be released after 1 year of implementation.
There's one point that just kind of came to mind here. You sort of said, that you would be worried that it somehow would influence, like if you would kind of release data halfway through, or you would kind of influence the behavior of the sample. Now, that's obviously from a sort of a purely sort of a scientific point of view, that's obviously would be a real problem. It would introduce some bias or whatever. But there is something that I'm not quite, that comes to mind here. So it's like, if I would implement a permanent universal basic income. One of the things I would do is I would basically run evening classes, broadcasts, you name it, what you can do with your time. So rather than just sort of saying, well, you just do whatever you want with the money, I would just say, hey, here's an amazing opportunity. How about this? How about that? How about this? So I would actually try to inspire people to make the most of it, rather than sort of stepping back. And I can see why you can't do this, but wouldn't it be in an actual real situation? Isn't that what any government, any responsible local authority would want to do, is encourage people to make the best of their lives now that they have this opportunity? And shouldn't that be somehow be reflected in a pilot study as well? I mean, in other words, those 2 municipalities that are involved, are they allowed in any way to kind of run programs of how to improve your life now that you've got the opportunity? Or do they have to just pretend as if it doesn't happen?
We haven't really thought about what you were talking about, but I would have to think it through more deeply. But now I don't think it's such a good idea, maybe, because, I mean, we don't want we want the pilot plan to go okay, but we are not manipulating it in order for it to be okay, if that makes sense. So obviously, every government, every city council wants the best for its citizens, but it doesn't mean, I think it's a kind of a paternalistic way of thinking about society, right? Thinking that they will not know what to do with 800 euros a month for 2 years. I think it's interesting enough to understand what they will do. I mean, we believe it's there. We don't want to think that there are better choices. I mean, it's equally okay if you choose to stay at home with your kids, or if you choose to hire a nanny and go away and work.
I mean, these conversations are bound to happen within families anyway, aren't they? People can say, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with that money? So that I think that discussion is going to happen within families, no doubt. The question is the local NGOs, the local charities, who now basically can recruit people to work in environmental projects and do all this good stuff. Should they kind of do that? Should they kind of say, hey guys, now you're getting this money, how about? And, so that there's a whole economy, a sort of informal economy building up around it, which is, of course, what you would want to see, isn't it? You would want to see people invest their time productively, constructively, in other ways as well. And of course, there will be civil society organizations that would benefit from this and that would encourage this too. Obviously, this is a question, that you have to probably think about, but I found that a really interesting question to what extent you would actually want to support this, because you can think of it in terms of manipulating the sample, but you can also think about it in terms of making the best of a great situation. It becomes manipulation at the point where you where it becomes sort of covert and where it kind of becomes carrot and stick. But when you have the local gardening association basically sort of says, well, we need volunteers to help us with, planting flowers in the municipality, or, or how about helping us to clean up some litter, like the park is very dirty. How about kind of, starting a group of volunteers who does that? And the question is this something that you would encourage and that you would see in a positive way? Or is this something that you would consider problematic? I mean, if it happens just naturally, that is, of course, positive. But what kind of level of promotion would you consider positive? And at what point would you consider it problematic?
I would not. I was actually going to say what you just said. Like, if it comes naturally, obviously it's a really good effect. And obviously the office will not do anything about it. But the thing is that in order to be able to say that the effects that we saw during the implementation of the pilot plan are due to have received the UBI for 2 years, we have to maintain as equally as possible the treatment and the control group. So if we are pushing some kind of behavior on the treatment group just because they received the UBI, and we are not doing the same things on the control group, we will end up not knowing if the more participation, let's say to clean up the streets or environmental activities, was due to having more money and also maybe more free time or whatever, or it was due to our pushing nudges or whatever you may put it. So I believe that anything that we encourage in the treatment group should be encouraged in the control group as well. And if not, we will not be doing so.
Okay, so but I mean, for instance, what I could foresee happening is that somebody who now is freed up to basically not just think about survival, but maybe think about the environment or think about other aspects of social life, and decides, hey, I'm going to use it. I'm going to make a startup. I'm going to start a new NGO. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to focusing my NGO on the sample, on the community, because I know that in this community, there's plenty of people like me now. And do you hear what I'm saying? So it would come out of the community, but it would very much then become a promotional effort, because this person would obviously know that their neighbors are in the same situation he is in or she is in, and so this could be a sort of a virtuous cycle,
Yeah, but that's actually an effect, an outcome that we are looking into. So that would be an effect, because it would come, I think that it would come naturally because of the UBI. But one thing is that, and another thing is that because we know that these two municipalities are receiving the UBI, we invite an NGO fair on a Sunday, and hey, you have a municipality where everyone is receiving 800 euros a month, so you have free space. I mean, they are free to go there, but we will not encourage them to do stuff like that from the office, just because we want to know what naturally happens without any manipulation from the office. But so, the example that you just said, it would be an actual effect of the pilot plan, right? And we're looking into it.
So do the participants know which sample they're in? Do they know whether they're in the in the randomized sample or whether they're in the community sample? Do they know?
They will, because if they are in the randomized sample, they will not be living in a municipality where everyone is receiving the UBI. So, I mean, as I told you, the communication will be conducted by letters receiving at your house, and they will be different. So if you are a participant from the municipality, you will receive something like, congratulations, no, not congratulations, but municipality X will be receiving the UBI, so you live in this municipality, so you will automatically be a participant, and the other participants from the randomized sample will receive a different formulation of letters. So they will obviously know if you live in a municipality where everyone is receiving the UBI, you will know it because the letter where you learn from it will say so.
Excellent. Well, this was really, really very interesting. I'm very conscious of time. As we always do, we kind of went on for too long, but I really, really enjoyed talking to you. I'd love to say come back in 6 or 8 months' time. I think we leave it open because I think you probably can't make a commitment at this point. But I will definitely send you an email, in a couple of months' time, and you will know whether we can have another chat, and also if we have another chat, how we can do this without compromising your research, because of course this would not be in our interest either. But if there is a way in which we can kind of maintain a dialogue over the period, then I think that would be really interesting. Also, as a historical document, is to see how how this develops, and how our sort of mindset kind of shifts as a result of your experience with the pilot.
I was very interested in explaining the pilot plan that we have designed, and it was really interesting talking to you, Nico. So thank you for inviting me in representation of the office. And yeah, I will be happy to keep contact because as you said, I cannot compromise because maybe in 4 months' time we will not have started the implementation yet. But I think it's important to keep in touch in order to let you know about news on the implementation.
Excellent. Well, Aida, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. Let's stay in touch. And if you have any other information that you would like viewers to have or to know, send me the links to web resources or whatever, and I'll stick it under the video so that people can click on it and they can explore whatever links. Yes, if you've got any additional information that you didn't get across or that would help to understand our conversation better, please do send me the links and I'll stick it under the video.
I'll send you the link for the website of the Office for the Pilot Plan, because it's also translated to English and some documents too, so everyone can read that. Excellent.
Aida, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wish you a lovely week, and best of luck with the pilot. It sounds really, really amazing. And I'm so jealous that I don't live in one of those municipalities.
Maybe in the future, Germany will have one too.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so.
Okay.
Aida, thank you very much.
Thank you. Keep in touch.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.